Weezer's sophomore record, Pinkerton, is weird. Like, really weird. Some of the lyrics are just straight up creepy. Some of them would probably disgust first-time listeners. Throughout all the changes, mishaps, and accidents that happened to cause this album to be formed, this album is just really odd. But everyone seems to agree that this was less the fault of Rivers being a super huge weirdo, and more so the victim of a really bad situation. Listen, I know this may come off as a big request, but I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed if you end up enjoying this video. I'm not going to beg, I just ask that if you really do enjoy this type of content, subscribe. And I promise more of this type of video will be made. Thanks. To get an understanding of what I mean, I have to take you back to the past. Not before Weezer was even a thing, but right when they started to become a thing. The year of our Lord, 1994. Specifically, early 1994. Weezer had just released their debut studio album on DGC Records called Weezer, and it just so happened to be a gigantic hit, like bigger than I think anyone could have imagined. Weezer's Blue Album, as it would begin to be called, was huge. It went 3 times platinum, reached number 16 on the US's Billboard Top 100, and to this day is spotted in the top 10s of the best album of the entire 1990s. So obviously the next step is to tour a little bit, regather, and do it again, right? Well, not really. At least for Weezer. The next step for Rivers was actually 2 different things. First was go to college, so he did. The next step was to get leg lengthening surgery, which, as you could probably figure, is horrifically painful. During this time, Rivers was undoubtedly in a lot of pain. For months, he had to go wear a brace every single day, and he was hospitalized for a lot of the time that he was going through the surgery. He was on painkillers almost all of the time.
Shorter than the other, is that right?
Yeah, when I was born, they were even, but as I got taller, my right leg just couldn't keep up for some reason, and yeah, by the time I was full grown, it was almost 2 inches shorter than the left leg.
Wow.
They cut your femur in half, and then they screw this cage around your leg and into your bone, and then every day you turn 4 screws on this cage, and it kind of separates either end of it a millimeter. So over the course of a couple months, it's separated 2 inches, and
the bone.
As it's doing that, the bone's
grows.
kind of growing in the middle.
Oh my God!
Wow.
There's actually a concert on Letterman's Late Show where Rivers performs while wearing said brace. So, of course, he instructed Matt and Brian to basically just go insane in the background while he played. You can actually almost notice the brace sometimes during the concert, but it's pretty difficult because he was wearing gigantic parachute pants. At this point, Rivers was still writing for the next album, which he had called Songs from the Black Hole. It was to be a ballad about a couple astronauts going into space, and the main influence over the album was Rivers' struggle to deal with essentially being a rock star. In fact, there's actually a full track list you can see and a couple songs you can listen to that haven't really been made into much since it was scrapped. But this was before he got surgery. During his time in school, struggling with being a rock star and going through immense amounts of pain, his songwriting was severely affected. People were wearing t-shirts of his band, but would walk right past him. During his time at Harvard, Rivers grew extremely unhappy. One of his biggest problems at Harvard was his growing sexual frustration. Rivers was finally getting back in the studio during his spring break. He had songs ready to record and he was rocking a super sick beard. He had already had 4 songs finished before he went to Harvard, which were Why Bother, Get You, No Other One, and Tired of Sex. But when he went back, he was sick. Sick of studying. Combined with just simply missing Weezer, he dropped out, only 2 semesters away from graduation, to finish his record with his band. It turned from a fun, playful take on success to a darker, more melancholic take on the same issue, along with his issues that he had been having personally. Songs from the Black Hole was scrapped. The album was to be renamed Pinkerton. The album was finished. 10 tracks, 34 minutes, 3 singles. Surely the fans would be happy with the new album, considering that Rivers' songwriting had gotten quite a bit deeper, right? Considering that it has a 10 on Pitchfork, it must have been absolutely adored, right? No. It was the complete opposite. Pinkerton, released on September 24th, 1996, was completely panned. It failed to meet sales expectations completely. Rolling Stone readers called Pinkerton the third worst album of 1996. Rivers was completely embarrassed. He wrote songs that meant so much to him, and it turns out that everyone just hated them. It didn't really help either that everything that I just mentioned previously had only happened in the span of a little more than 2 years. If you really do think about it, 2 years isn't a long time, especially when you're an adult. Rivers was completely and utterly distraught by the failure of Pinkerton. Weezer was basically taken to a halt. One of the biggest parts of the band, Matt Sharp, would leave. He said it was due to a lack of communication. Rivers, in his Pinkerton diaries, said, "This has been a tough year. It's not just that the world has said Pinkerton isn't worth a shit, but that the Blue album wasn't either. It was a fluke. It was the Buddy Holly video. I'm a shitty songwriter." You know, I could definitely just end the video here. Show's over, Pinkerton was hated, Weezer broke up and never did anything ever again. But, for better or the worse, that's simply not the case. While Rivers was definitely incredibly embarrassed over the huge flop that was Pinkerton at the time, he didn't give up on his songwriting abilities. Even though the band had their differences, which meant a change in lineup as mentioned previously, they did come back together, eventually. Rivers fortunately continued to make music, some on his own, some with some actual band members of Weezer, and some more with Weezer coming in subsequently. The Green Album was actually pretty much completely preferred over Pinkerton, with Rolling Stone calling it the anti-Pinkerton. Now, the revitalization of Weezer in the early 2000s called for people to actually take another glance at Pinkerton. And as the story goes, people started liking Pinkerton, people started liking it more, people love it, and now it's regarded as one of their best. Perhaps even the best. In my opinion, Pinkerton is one of the only albums that I can sit through all of the way. It's one of my favorites. While I do think that Blue is maybe just a tiny bit better of a record, Pinkerton is an excellent listen. And if you haven't listened to any Weezer before, well, I still suggest that you listen to Blue first, and then Pinkerton. But that's besides the point. I'm glad that people started to finally take another look at Pinkerton. It is an absolutely amazing record. It definitely deserves the 10s it now gets. And in my opinion, it is probably one of the biggest classics of the 1990s. So, let's do a quick recap before I end the video. Weezer. They exist. Weezer, but it's Blue. Weezer, but they're huge, all over the place even. Weezer, but now Rivers is back in school, and Rivers goes through a surgery that normally children only get because they actually have growing bones. Then Weezer, but they're bad. Weezer, but they're the worst band ever, apparently. Yet, now they're not. At least, unless you're Pitchfork. Weezer, but now they're one of the most beloved acts of this current century. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.